What's up, y'all? We're about to do a special little live stream today. Got Beyond Terrain coming in, and hopefully you guys can stick around and enjoy the show. Let's see, there he is. Yo.
What's up, brother? How you doing, man?
Hey, man. All right, here we are. All right.
Yeah, finally reconnecting.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Back again. Let me make sure I get my volume up here. Oh, yeah, here we go. Okay, now we're good. Cool, man. All right, we're back again. So, all right, everybody. This is my buddy Liev from Beyond Terrain, and he's got an Instagram channel. And we found each other a while back. I'm not sure how you found my channel exactly, but you interviewed me a while back, and then since then you've been putting out some really good content, really thought-provoking and interesting stuff, dude. So yeah, pretty impressed with your channel, man. It's really good stuff.
Right on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so figured I'd have you on, man, and ask you some questions and see what's up.
Definitely, man. I'm excited, dude. I love chatting about this stuff. So
Sweet. All right. Yeah. First of all, congratulations on getting married, dude. That's
thank you.
That's
Thank you. Yeah, it's been amazing. Definitely.
cool. Yeah, I bet you've had just a blast, man. So
Yeah.
really happy to hear that, dude.
Yeah.
So that's
I'm back
awesome.
on Instagram just for this. I've been taking some time off, soaking it in, kind of focusing on some real life things, but
yeah,
I'm back for this. I'm back for the live. Had to do it.
Right on, man. Appreciate you coming back into the matrix for us. So, all right, cool, man. Well, yeah, I'm sure a lot of people already know your channel, but why don't you kind of explain? Why don't you give a little background as kind of who you are and where you're from and your background and like what inspired you to make your social media?
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Prince Edward Island, a small island in Canada. It's paradise in the summertime. Beautiful, beautiful place. I live in Nova Scotia now. I came out here for school, not far from the island, in the Maritimes, right? So really good people out here. Great community. Seems really tight knit, close. So that's obviously really been ingrained in me. And yeah, I went out to school. I went to Dalhousie for my undergrad. I did biochem and molecular, and started that in 2018. So halfway through, sort of this COVID fiasco hit, and obviously I wasn't happy with the politics surrounding it, and because I was quite politically oriented at the time, and so I certainly didn't agree with sort of the path that they were taking, and that kind of just led me down to look a little deeper at what was going on. And fortunately I had the ability to kind of go and read the papers and understand them. And when I went and looked at the papers and sort of challenged some of the thoughts, when I challenged some of my professors, I just saw that there were gaps in logic, right? There was no explanation for why they were running PCR at such a high threshold. There was no evidence that masks actually work or that lockdowns are effective. They were implementing all these policies based off, they said science, but really it was all just political, right? So that was the big thing. That was one of the things that pushed me. And so obviously it's a journey, man. Like when I started, I wrote some notes on what I thought the terrain was, and now I have such a different perspective, and it seems like it's evolving, but there are fundamental principles that, I'll likely never go back on unless, there's some significant, experiments to prove something. But yeah, like germs, obviously, like do not cause disease. There's absolutely no evidence. Initially I thought I was following the sort of exosome idea. Do viruses exist now? I wouldn't say that there's objective evidence that viruses do exist. Now you get into vitamins and you get into actual biochemistry as well, and you start to question, what experiments are done to actually prove this as well. And it goes deep, man. You can get into the Gerald Pollack stuff and the new biology, the quantum biology. That's sort of interesting field. I don't really focus on it. I couldn't recite any of the experiments or literature on that side of things, but I think it's fascinating to listen to. I love Gerald Pollack and his work. He was
Mhm.
certainly influential in sort of opening up my horizon. So it's been a journey, man. Like there's a lot of different ways that I've changed my mind, and but I'm just constantly trying to challenge myself. I'm just trying to get to some sort of truth, right? So I'm really trying to like challenge all of my beliefs and preconceived notions, because if it is the truth, it can hold up to any scrutiny at all. So I think that's really important. I think that's lost.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I agree, man. So you were going to school for molecular biology?
Yeah, biochem and molecular biology. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, molecular biology. Okay. And then right in the middle of that, COVID hit and you started kind of seeing some gaps in logic and you started questioning some things like as you're getting educated at the time, right? So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so did you end up finishing your education then?
I did. I finished my degree, and I took a bunch of micro courses as well. I almost switched into microbiology after the COVID stuff started, like after I found out about the terrain,
Mm-hmm.
because I thought, this could really solidify my argument. But
Mm-hmm.
I was going to take me an extra year, and I thought if I got to finish out this academia nonsense, I just got to get it done. Like I could only last the 2 extra years.
Sure.
And I switched, so I had a kind of a change of pathways. I was going to be a dental surgeon. That was the route I wanted to
Yeah.
take. And now I'm doing a master's of counseling psychology, which kind of gives me more freedom to be able to work within a framework that I sort of believe in and that I live and back. So
Awesome.
that's the path, and I'm almost done. I finished in December, so.
Cool. Awesome. All right. So let's like go back to when you started questioning things. So were you, let's say like before COVID and everything happened, like were you a believer in viruses and like vaccines and just the whole theory?
100%, man. I was so the changing moment for me really was and I remember it so vividly now. So 2020 hit, and January, February, there was talk about it coming, and really end of February, March, it hit hard, right? So
Mm.
early in 2020. I thought, I was kind of going down the path of this was leaked from a lab. That was the sort of conspiracy theory that I went down into, right? Because I was fully convinced, viruses are real, they exist, they cause disease, right? And vaccines, I was on board, man. My buddies like were kind of like, oh, that's nonsense, man. Like you don't need to be taking vaccines and stuff. And then I was like, guys, like there's a lot of evidence and research for it, right? So
Yeah.
I was on the side, man. I was on the modern medicine side, right? So
Right.
um,
What about polio? What
polio,
about polio?
everything, man. I was like fully like mainstream narrative when it came to science. I always sort of questioned things. I always had that sort of side to me, but for some reason, science kind of pulled the fast one over my eyes. I really
Mm.
trusted the experts, right? So I was on that side, man, and it was a big shift for me. So I remember I started fishing lobster, and I would have a lot of time in the evenings. I was so tired, so I'd be watching YouTube on the lab leak stuff, and then I come across Andrew Kaufman's channel, and um, he was talking about how viruses don't cause disease, and or any microbe for that matter. And I went down to the comments, and I like never ever do this. I left a paragraph of a comment saying, you don't know what you're talking about. I study, microbiology, and
Man, you were that guy, yeah.
dude, I was that guy, man. And then he calmly came back and he sent me a link to another video, and I watched it because it hit me like deep inside. It hit me,
Mm.
and I was like, man, all right, there might be something to this. So then, actually, from that point on, I tried every day to disprove the terrain and prove the germ theory correct. Because I wanted to be that guy who was going to dismantle this nonsense, right? This conspiracy terrain nonsense. And the more I looked at the papers, when I read the contagion studies, when I read the studies on genomics, when I read the studies on virology, it just sort of all came together, and I was like, it just disproved the germ theory 100%. There was absolutely no sliver of objective evidence. So it was quite the transition. It was quite the transition, but it came through that kind of challenging my beliefs, even in some sort of backwards way, because I was trying to prove myself right, but I actually looked at the evidence, and that's what seems to be lacking in people who believe in this modern narrative. They say, oh, I read the literature. Well, they might skim abstracts or read discussion sections, but that's a very different thing than getting into the methods and results, because that's the objective part of the paper. The discussion and the abstract, of course, are the subjective parts, the inductive reasoning, which is the more subjective part. It's the interpretation of the results. It's the story, the narrative that's told about the results. So you don't see that true scientific exploration where you're looking at the methods and criticizing the methods and looking at the results, which is the more, there are ways to kind of fudge the results with statistics and different ways like that too. But the methods is the big one. And people skip the method sections. I skip the method sections. It seems kind of useless or a waste of time when you're in academia trying to pump out a paper, right? That's the way it goes, man, like in academia. So
yeah. Time, dude. Everybody just wants to read the abstract. Do it all the time. Now you got me. I'm not going to do that anymore. But
it's a citation error. If you cite from an abstract, it's a citation error, and it happens all the time. Even citing from a discussion, it's not great. You really want to be citing from result sections. And when you look at citations of paper, you'll realize that sometimes papers have 95% of their citations are citation errors. And this is like admitted by, it's a huge problem in the literature. Again, admitted by papers, which is kind of ironic. It's admitted by the establishments, by academia, so it dismantles its own system. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous.
I appreciate people like you that actually go in and do the work and actually read the studies to try to figure out like what's going on. Like, is what they're saying in here actually true? And then you got this guy over here citing this study and repeating it just like parrots. Everybody's like a parrot repeating the same thing over and over again. But you go back and you're like, what? This original thing isn't even true. I understand. I can conceive that, conceptually, like that is possible that can happen, because that's just how the world works, dude.
Absolutely.
So yeah. And that's funny. You actually came full circle, and didn't you have Andrew Kaufman on your show?
I did, and that was one of the goals of the podcast. So yeah.
Yes, man. Yeah, you came back, invited him on. That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, that explains a few things. So, let's talk about. All right, so we're on viruses. There's obviously like bacteria, parasites, and all that stuff. So what's your thoughts on? You had like a post a while back where you were eating like a worm out of an oyster, right?
Yeah, out of a codfish. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So what's your thoughts on parasites? What's your stance on that?
It's the same discussion for parasites as it is for fungus and bacteria. The role that I believe that these organisms play is bioremediation. They are bioaccumulators, and so to break those kind of weird terms down, they change a toxic environment into even to say toxic and healthy, it takes an environment, say with heavy metals and pesticides, and it changes it to the base blocks, down to the elements, if we want to kind of conceptualize it that way, right? It kind of breaks it down to a state where it's not toxic anymore, and our body can use these materials to rebuild, right? So, and say with heavy metals, they bioaccumulate. So bacteria can consume a higher concentration of toxicity than our tissues can, right? So if you have, 10%, this is kind of absurd numbers, but if you have 10% concentration of toxins in your blood, right, these numbers are absurd. A bacteria would be able to do 20% of their body weight could be toxins. So they can accumulate it at a higher rate. Fungus, even higher, and parasites, even higher. So that's why you see fungus and parasites sort of in the later stages of disease and in the pleomorphic cycle, which is another interesting concept. But you see how it develops right through this cycle. So bacteria do the same as fungus and parasites, but they do it at a much greater concentration. They can store more toxins, and so when you pass the parasite or you pass the fungus, and because you are going to excrete them at some point, they're full of toxins. They're getting it out of your internal environment and trying to change it into, they might fix it back into some sort of more mineral-like state where it's not as available for plants to uptake. We don't, understand all of the parameters here. It's really interesting though when you do read soil or environmental parasitology. They actually do have these concepts in the literature. Like bioaccumulation and bioremediation are great keywords to use if you're going to do a Google Scholar search,
Mm-hmm.
because you'll see these papers come up. There's studies with fish, insects, different types of organisms, and they say that the role of the parasites are actually bioremediating and bioaccumulating. They don't say that they're sort of infectious. Maybe they do kind of assume that to be the case, but they still say that they're playing this role, that, this fish has so much heavy metals in it, that, the parasites had to come and clean it
Yeah.
up. And so it's kind of interesting. You can think about this. So with the codfish, you find all of the words, or all the worms and parasites in the belly of the codfish, right? And so a fish is always upright. If a fish is not upright, it's dead, right? So gravity, whatever that is, but we do know that things go from up to down.
Mm-hmm.
The heavy metals are heavier than the other elements in our body, are
Mm-hmm.
all going to sink to the bottom of the fish, right? So that's why you see all the worms in the belly, and they're not in the back of the fish, like up top on the fish,
Mm-hmm.
because all the heavy metals kind of sink to the belly. So,
Yeah.
is it a good idea to go and eat parasites? No, because they're going to be full of heavy metals. But then again, I think about Agenus experiments where he gave raw fish versus cooked fish, and the animals absorbed more heavy metals from the cooked fish than the raw fish. So I think if you're consuming raw parasites or raw fish, you're not going to absorb as much of the heavy metals as you were if you were going to cook
Yep.
it. So if you are going to cook your fish, maybe you cut the belly out. I just don't cut the belly. Like, I always cut the belly out of my fish anyways. It's thin. It's not as, I don't know. I just something that I kind of been doing now. I don't really have like evidence other than sort of that kind of logic that I just presented for that reason. But
Yeah.
yeah, bioremediators, bioaccumulators, that's the main role. They're cleaning up our environment. It's as simple as that.
Right. Cool. Yeah. So that makes sense, and yeah, that's I'm obviously on board with that too. And but every once in a while, everyone's got like that rebuttal, or everyone knows that guy. Like I know a guy specifically, he's a friend of mine here that I met recently. And he's actually been on like a couple survival shows, and he makes his own bows, like long bows and stuff. So he's a really interesting dude, and I'm gonna interview him probably next month. But he's not exactly like full blown, terrain like you and I are. But I've asked him some questions about that too because he's intrigued. He's intrigued about kind of what we believe in. But he's like the guy that he was on like a survival show with this guy, and he ate a piece of bear meat or something like that, right? And just became full of worms, just completely full of worms, and he had to get like some sort of procedure done. Allegedly, this is the story. Otherwise, he would have died, and they were like spreading to his brain and all this stuff. Like, I had to think about that. I didn't really have anything to say to him right away. You know what I mean? I was just like, wow, that's really interesting. I've never known anybody that's experienced that. But I believe that there are, things like that happen. And it just seems like, oh, wow, the worms came and just attacked and tried to kill this guy. But it's like, I wonder if he was just so toxic, man. Like they just thrived in his stomach. I mean, what would you say to that?
So that's the thing, right? So we kind of got to break this down, and it's a case by case thing in these scenarios, right?
Right.
So yeah, like what was the state of his lifestyle? Was he living some sort of toxic lifestyle that those worms kind of came in and clung on to that environment?
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the first question that you kind of have to ask. Now, this idea that the brains were spreading, or the worms were spreading to his brain from his
Right.
gut. I'm curious about what kind of evidence there was for that, or when he got to the hospital, was that the assumption that was made that, oh, this is going to go to the brain?
Right.
Now, maybe his brain was full of neurotoxins, and the worms were going to develop in his brain. Were they going to go from his gut to his brain?
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's like, what kind of evidence do we have for this idea, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
can we see the worms move through our tissues into the brain? You'd think that there'd be some sort of trace that an autopsy could catch.
Right.
I'm just like, In the literature, there's nothing. There's absolutely no literature on this. That's certainly the case. Like I've searched for, even ringworm. They say that it can come in from the ground up through your foot, and then you get a ringworm and it traveled through your foot. And you go to the literature, and it's just another fact not found error, right? It's like you go back to the original papers, and there's just no evidence on it except for the story that we tell, right? It's, oh, this must have happened. What's that?
Do you mean hookworm or ringworm?
Sorry, hookworm. Hookworm is the one that comes up through your foot. You're right. Sorry, you had the ringworm, right? That was the one that's why I was thinking that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, right? We have these stories that we kind of understand, and then it's like, is that what they're saying at the hospital? Like, is this going to happen? And here's the other thing that, you got to think about. He said that he ate raw bear meat, so everyone thinks that eating raw bear meat is going to give you a worm that's going to kill you and spread to your brain. Um, Again, there's not really any evidence for this claim, but that's sort of this understanding that we have. So was that exactly what they were searching for? It's just, there's a lot of questions that come up with the story. And if they're going to call themselves a science, or at least a field backed by science, you'd think that there'd be some papers written about some evidence behind this stuff. And there's none of it, right? So it's a story. And it's one that's scary. It invokes a little bit of fear. It's one that we've been told for a long time. So that's the thing. Was the guy sick from eating raw bear meat? I'm not going to say that he wasn't, but again, you got to ask, like, what was his levels of toxicity before going into the woods and eating the bear meat? You know what I mean? So it's just a lot of different questions that come up.
Yeah. I 100% agree with that. And like you're going back with, like, is there actually any evidence? I think about that with viruses a lot too. I'm just like, wait a minute. I'm like, has someone actually captured on film like a virus, like someone sneezing and a virus flying out, and then someone else like inhaling it and then it going inside? Is that like a captured video or something? Like, how are they so sure about this? And it's like, and then someone explained to me, like, they just basically make like assumptions. They assume that, like, because of physics, like the virus is long in this environment, so it's going to stay on the surface for this long, and then they make all these kind of jumps in logic, but there's never like a clear line of, yeah, we have a full video. Here you go, watch this video. It's a virus going in and making someone sick. No. So yeah, same thing with like the worms, and that's kind of obviously the first place I went with the bear parasite thing, was that I was thinking this guy had to be totally toxic.
Yeah.
Because these don't happen to everybody, If it did, like, everybody would know about it. But like, there's obviously people that do eat bear meat, have no issues. But that's always a big one that comes up, is bear meat.
Yeah.
It's just a big scare tactic that they have there. So you got me wondering about, what's the pleomorphic cycle? I've heard it before, but I can't remember what it is.
It's this concept essentially, and I'll talk about the evidence because I've been talking about evidence a lot. But the pleomorphic cycle essentially is the development of, bacteria, fungus, parasites in our, sorry, my cat's going back and forth here. It's the development of the microbes in our body. So, it starts with this idea of like a little microzyma, like a little somatid, they call it, a protid. And it goes back to Antoine Béchamp, one of the first guys to kind of go against Louis Pasteur, right? They were the rivals back in the day. A lot of people talk about Béchamp, right? So this cycle is just the development from these microzyma all the way up to sort of fungal cells, right? Single-celled fungal cells, or even parasites. So really the evidence for it is quite clear. You don't need to run any sort of backwards, complicated study. All you need is a dark field microscope with a good enough resolution, and you can see these shapes, these organisms change shape under the microscope, and you can change the environment of the sample, because you can view these samples live. You can view it alive. It's the only microscope that you can see live. Well, you can see some living things under a light microscope, but you can't go really deep with the resolution. With dark field, you can go deeper. So you can see, you look up pleomorphism and look up the pleomorphic cycle, Gaston Naesson's. I reposted one of Gaston Naesson's one of their students' videos, and you can see videos of the dark field microscope, and you can see these, like it'll go from a circle cell to a rod, right? And they'll change shapes. And so people are able to manipulate the contents of the blood and actually change the shape of these microbes, and they can change them back and forth to different shapes, different. So that's sort of where the term pleomorphism comes from. It means multiple forms. It was once called polymorphism, and there's different ways to spell pleomorphism. So it's essentially, instead of us catching microbes, the idea is that we develop microbes that, I'm not quick to deny that we don't share microbes between one another. I think that makes sense. But, if my body is not toxic and your body's toxic and you have microbes, your microbes aren't going to make me sick because I have no toxic environment for those microbes to latch onto. But I do think that, and I'm sort of speculating here, I do think that we share microbes in our environment. So I'm not quick to diminish that even as a mechanism, because if I'm toxic and you're toxic and we live in the same house with the same drywall and MDF, and it might get wet and there might be aerosolized toxins. I'm not quick. I wouldn't deny that, we share the environment. Our microbes are taught, like, communicating, through our bodies. I wouldn't say that that's an absurd idea either. What evidence is there for it? Again, it's kind of slim. But getting back to the pleomorphic cycle, you can visibly see these microbes change. And again, they admit that H. pylori is a pleomorphic microorganism, that it can change shapes, that sometimes it takes the shape of an E. coli and sometimes it takes the shape of, a different, it's admitted again in the literature, because if they put a dark field condenser on a light microscope, you can see these microbes changing shape if they are alive. Now, most microscopy, you look at dead tissue because you can visualize it better with heavy metals. You can visualize it better you can dehydrate it and freeze it. That's like electron microscopy, but they still do this for light microscopy. They still stain it, and you can still visualize it better. So, when you look at the live tissues, and I really urge people to go look at a video on YouTube, and you can see it. They're changing shapes. They change shapes in the experiments that have been conducted by Gunther Enderlein, Gaston Naesson's. I'm sure Bear-Paul Lando has done some of these. Antoine Béchat didn't really get into the pleomorphic cycle. He focused on these microzyma. And I'll mention his experiment quickly here. But just to be clear, I really urge people to go watch these videos, because you can see these microbes change shape. So it's not an absurd idea. Again, it's admitted by the academics and the mainstream literature. It's not something that's taught in microbiology, of course, because they really need that monomorphic idea that we catch one sort of microbe. They can't be changing shapes. And I'll bring it back to one more point after. But so the microzyma, and I hope I'm being clear here, but the microzyma, going back, Antoine Béchat worked a lot with fermentation. So he was able to invert sugar in a closed jar, right, using natural clay, which under the dark field microscope, you could see these microzymas moving, right? They kind of are just little particles. They bounce around. So he made sure that there was only microzymas. He heated it up, killed all the bacteria, and he was able to invert sugar and prove that there were bacteria that developed when there was no bacteria present, and it was in a sealed container. His control, he used synthetic chalk versus natural chalk. So the natural chalk obviously contained these microorganisms, or not microorganisms, these microzyma, which are present in every tissue of the body and in natural substances. And the synthetic chalk, of course, synthetic, it's not going to contain any of these fundamental units of life. That's what he would call them. And of course, that didn't invert the sugar. No bacteria developed, right? So that's how we sort of controlled that. Antoine Béchat did this study back in the early days, and it's one that you can do yourself, right? I mean, you'd have to confirm it, I guess, through a dark field microscope, but that was the original study that sort of determined that maybe it can come from these microzymas. So it's an interesting idea. Do I die on this hill? No, I absolutely don't, but it's something that I've been exploring a little bit, and it seems to be a pretty sound argument and sound evidence. So the other interesting thing about this, microbiology, and this is something that we really brushed over in my microbiology classes and that academia brushes over completely, and it's this concept called the Great Plate Anomaly. So this idea is that, less than 1% of known microbes, as in we know them through genomics, which is a questionable endeavor, um, we can't culture them in a lab. So we cannot have a purity of 99% of the microbes that we think we know, right? So we have this phylogenetic tree where we categorize all these microbes of different families and genus and species and all that, but we can't isolate them and culture them in a lab. So, how much can you really know about a microorganism if you can't take it into a lab, right? And study it in some sort of purity in some sort of medium. Obviously, you can't run a Koch's postulate study.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so they don't know they don't know the environments needed to grow these microorganisms. So it's actually really questionable on what kind of microorganisms do they actually know about, right? Because and classifying these microorganisms, how do we know that we're correct in our classifications here? How do we know that they can't change shape and forms? It's admitted that they change shape and forms. Do their genetics change when they change shape or form? I don't know. There's no way of really confirming this based on the methods that we have available to us nowadays. So there's a lot of gaps even in microbiology. A lot of people question the existence of viruses nowadays, but I'm kind of questioning on what microbes do we actually know exist as different species. Obviously, there are microbes present in and around us all the time. They're part of a healthy order and a diseased order as well. And I should mention that this pleomorphic cycle is sort of reserved to the disease cycle generally. That's how it's understood. But I think I'm going to pass it back over to you and maybe allow you to help me clear any of this up if I have been clear. But anyways, I just question the microbiology as well. Now, this great plate anomaly, I think it's understated. And again, it's admitted. There's plenty of microbes that we can't isolate,
No,
and we can't grow in a lab. Yeah.
yeah, that's all great, dude. That's all great. Yeah, the pleomorphic cycle, that's interesting. And I have heard of that before. I just forgot it was called that. I have heard of polymorphism. I'm not even sure where I heard that, but that's what they literally used to call that exact thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Polymorphism, the pleomorphic cycle is kind of refers to the cycles that they talk about. Like Gaston Naissance talks about the cycle. His cycle is a 16-step cycle. Now our understanding of it now, I just interviewed Dr. Marie Arce. She's fantastic on the pleomorphic cycle. Her take was that we don't actually know how many steps there are in the cycle, and we don't know if it's actually a perfect circle either, right? Like sometimes they might branch off depending on the environment too, right? So it's likely more complex than what we could know. And again, our limited ability to alter live blood outside of the body, right? Because once you take the blood out of the body, it's going to act differently, of course. It's slowly starting to oxidize, so you have to work very quickly. And so it's really it's a difficult thing to study, the pleomorphic cycle. That's why I don't necessarily die on this hill. It's not something that we need to understand to, disprove the germ theory. It's just sort of something that's fun and interesting to look into at this point.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that was going to be kind of my next question, was just kind of like maybe throw this a different direction and ask you, what's the point of all this? Like what's the point of trying to figure all this out? Do you think, what's the end goal? Is there a goal at the end? Is it just the journey itself? That's the adventure? What do you think the point? Do you think we're meant to know the answers to everything?
I ponder these questions quite often. How much can we actually know? That's sort of the big one I always ask, is how much can we actually know? And again, it's like when we explore these things like pleomorphism and when we explore the germ theory and all these different things, right? And science in general, to me, you don't need to know any of it to be healthy. Our ancestors had a didn't have a science per se. I mean, maybe you could classify some of their work as scientific in a way through trial and error and clinical trials over thousands of years. That's what an old professor of mine used to say, a native professor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, our ancestors didn't know the science. They didn't know pleomorphism. They didn't know, you know, all of this stuff. And basically, you know, the conclusion that I come to is, you know, for health and wellness really is that getting back to nature and integrating nature into our modern lives is likely the best way to approach things. And sort of this exploration of even, you know, do vitamins exist and are, you know, versus synthetic vitamins. Again, I don't need to explore whether or not vitamins exist to know that synthetic vitamins are bad for you. I just know that what is not natural is bad for you. 100%. There's no question about that. It's not a logical fallacy. It's quite a logical thing to think.
Yeah.
Many people will say that that's an appeal to nature logical fallacy, but none of those individuals have read any sort of literature on logic, because the original paper back in the early 1900s on it had a large section to discuss that, saying that what is unnatural is unhealthy is not the logical fallacy. To say that what is natural is good and what is unnatural is bad, that is the logical fallacy. You're ascribing morality. That is where it becomes illogical. So there's a big misconception there, which I've been talking about a lot recently on the YouTube channel. But, you know, what's the point? For me, I kind of enjoy it. I like learning about this stuff. It's fun, man. And, you know, I think like, I think that it serves a purpose in a way in this world that we live in now. I think that there is value in exploring an alternative theory that fits our reality better, because people need a story to cling on to. And so when you're going against one of the most powerful dogmatic religions known as modern science,
Mm-hmm.
you need to have some sort of alternative to offer them, because the uncomfort and, you know, of not knowing is unbearable for most people. I don't really have a problem with saying that I don't know jack shit, and I'm probably never going to know jack shit. I'm going to search and look and study, and, you know, because I find I find this interesting, and so long as it doesn't interfere with the well-being of myself and my family and my community, you know, that I can spend time, you know, reading and learning.
Yeah.
I don't see a problem with it per se, but, you know, how important is it for someone's daily life to go deep and really explore this? I don't think it's really all that necessary. And I question the validity of of empiricism in general. I really think that it's a flawed epistemology. So, you know, there's a lot of questions, right? So it's, you know, I don't know, man. It's a good question. It's questions you should ask yourself.
Yeah.
So.
And I can tell you what has intrigued me about the whole subject itself, personally, is that it's, for me, the fun part is dispelling lies. That to me is fun. So, because right when I sort of had, like, I guess you could call, like, my biological awakening with the whole whatever raw meat and just changing my diet and just all that stuff, I also had like a simultaneous spiritual awakening at the same time.
Absolutely.
And so I don't know, I'm pretty sure that to a lot of people, and I don't know what happened first, but it happened at the same time. And, you know, I started looking into religions and studying things about, you know, creation and God and good and evil and the devil and all this stuff. All these subjects came up at the same time I was looking into, you know, terrain theory and viruses and bacteria. I was just doing a deep dive on all of it because I believe it's all connected. So what's interested me about the whole terrain theory thing and the germ theory thing is I believe we're being lied to. And when you get into religion, and, you know, I don't adhere actually to a specific religion right now, but there's some truths and principles in a lot of religions that I think are you know, they're very solid. But I was raised basically in, you know, like most Americans in, you know, Christian churches. So my fundamental basis is based upon good and evil, you know, God and the devil. And, you know, they say the devil is the father of lies. And so there's some truth in the scriptures, man, where, like, you got this dark force out there that they've known about for thousands of years, and they call him the father of lies. And so fast forward, and now we're here into the, you know, the science, or the religion of science. and we're just being lied to, man. And like, why are we being lied to? Well, we're being lied to for greed and ego and like all these things that they tell you about, like in the Bible, that is like bad for your soul. And so it's just like everything is just, to me, it's like it's so biblical. And so that's what really intrigues me, is when you get into the lies part of it. So I've boiled down basically good and evil down to truth and lies. So, you know, you can just rename those. You can interchange those words out. But right now, I think we're in a battle of that. You know, the dark forces out there want to hide the truth. They want to spread lies to where everybody's confused. You know, nobody knows what to eat. Nobody knows what shots to take, what medicine to take, how to heal themselves. They don't know whether to go to a holistic doctor, an allopathic doctor, whatever. Everybody's so confused, man. And that's, you know, a lot of us have been tricked, but there's a few of us, I think, that have broken out of that, and they're like, wait a minute, like, I think we're being tricked. And so, you know, it's just, that's what's intrigued me personally about my own personal journey, and like trying to understand philosophically of like, what's the point of all this? You know, what's the point of all it? Well, I think it's very simple, man. We're being lied to, and let's try to just uncover the truth underneath this like mountain of lies we're all living on, you know?
Absolutely. I think that's a really great take too. And I had a really similar experience. You know, I feel like it's really difficult to have, you know, some sort of separated sort of enlightenment, if we want to call it that, you know. I feel like mine was sort of predominantly spiritual in a way. And, but then again, it's like, it's funny because, you know, I was out I was writing one day and I was downtown Halifax on the railroads. Like no one ever really bothers me there. I was downtown. It was kind of my own little sanctuary, and I'm sitting on a rock writing about what my thoughts are, trying to kind of gather what I'm thinking about the terrain. And this guy walks up behind me and he's like, "Hey man, what's going on?" Like, I was like, "Oh, I'm just like looking at the sun, like just writing some stuff." He's like, "Oh, cool. Like I was gonna come look at the sun too. You mind if I like have a seat?" And I was like, "Oh, sure, man." Like this is like really peak when I was having this, and you know, like this sort of enlightenment, this awakening, whatever you want to call it. And he sits down and he's like, "What are you writing about?" And I was like, "Oh, like this terrain theory, you know, like I don't think germs cause disease. At least I'm pretty sure they don't." And he's like, "Oh man, like you ever hear about agenus?" And I was like, "Oh man, I never heard about him, you know." And I was like, "What the hell, man?" Like it just kind of crazy blew my mind. Like looking back on it now, like, and then I was like, from that day, he's like, "Man," he's like, "I eat like raw meat every day and like raw liver and raw eggs and butter." And I was like, "Oh, like no way, man. Like you don't mind?" Like, and I was open, right? So I was asking him. I was like, "You know what?" He's like, "Man," he's like, "I got some eggs on me right now. Like, do you want one?" And we ate a raw egg there, and then we exchanged numbers, and like, you know, we were talking, and we just kind of became buddies there for a bit, and um, and it's funny, man, like he was like just some first year kid living in res, and you know, he didn't eat the meal plan. He just ate like raw foods, man, and had his little fridge in his dorm room, and everybody thought he was fucking crazy because he didn't wear a mask on the bus, and like, you know, it's just hilarious, man. And this guy just appears out of the, like, you know what I mean? It's just like
Dude,
this alignment, you know?
that guy, the Augenus touched a lot of people, dude.
Yeah, dude.
That a lot of people, man. I remember the first raw dairy farmer that I ever found. I was just like so excited to find raw milk. It was 6 years ago, right at the very beginning of my journey. And I roll up to his farm. I hop out of my truck, and this farmer comes out with his overalls, and he's got a lazy eye, and he comes right up to me. And I swear to God, the first thing he said to me was, "Do you know Augenus?" Like what? It was so weird, dude. Like,
That's
yeah,
nuts, dude.
here. Why I'm here, dude. And like, it's like he knows, you know, it's weird. It's like he knows when people come there that they've studied him. But you know, I also went to my wife went to a festival this weekend. It was like a homesteading festival in Missouri, and we met a lot of people in person down there, and they were obviously intrigued by our diet, and met people that personally knew Augenus, man. Like one of the first people we talked to, we were talking about raw meat, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I personally knew Augenus." I was like, "What?"
It's crazy, man.
Yeah. Just yeah, that guy he touched a lot of people's lives,
Yeah.
man.
So it's funny, right? Because like there's only a handful of people in Nova Scotia who sell raw dairy, and when I finally found like a farmer that sold it, it was one of the first questions I asked him. I said, do you know Agenus vonderplanets? And he didn't. He didn't know them.
Hmm.
And my farmer came to these conclusions through the Bible. And he's a very religious man, and he lives a very simple, life, and he lives for God, and he adheres by the principles that he learned about, and just kind of coming back to your point about religion, about there being a lot of truth in religion. Of course, there's a lot of different avenues you could take with religion, and but it's really interesting that people can come to these conclusions through true study of the texts. And
Yeah.
when I started this, I actually had a Muslim individual reach out to me, a good friend now, and he just wanted to have a chat, and he talked about the Quran and how in the Quran, when you read it, it talks about consuming, raw animals, raw food, and it talks about dietary principles that would align with what we think is optimal here, and I thought that was really interesting, and what the Quran allows and what is permissible is fascinating to me. The way that it's written, the way that it sort of teaches itself through the study of Arabic. You kind of have to learn the language of the Quran. It's just so fascinating exploring these texts. These texts are obviously extremely powerful and have a lot of meaning because they influence a lot of people.
Yeah.
I kind of draw the line at when it becomes organized and when you have establishments, and these tend to
Yeah.
tyrannies, of course. But it's interesting that my farmer never heard of Agenus, and he's never looked them up, and I've talked about him like numbers of times,
Hmm.
and he doesn't care. He lives, man. He doesn't need it, Agenus or anyone to tell him
Yeah.
that he doesn't need to vaccinate his animals or his
Yeah.
kids, and
Yeah.
so it's kind of funny, man. Like it's just interesting how the truth can come to people in many many different ways as well, and
Yeah.
it's just amazing. It's amazing.
That's interesting, dude. Yeah. So speaking of Agenus, what are you eating nowadays? What should I like?
I eat raw food every day, man. I eat it every day. I can't lie. I eat cooked food as well, like with family, and I again, I can't lie. I feel better when I eat raw meat, raw foods, man. But I do eat it every day. Drink raw milk every day, quite a lot of it. I love milk, man. Like I'm hooked on it. I'm addicted. But raw eggs every day, it's easy, and I got raw ground from the farmer, unvaccinated. Like I got it in the freezer that I just pull out pretty well every day. I have for lunch, and I'll
Mhm.
probably eat a cooked meal once a day for the most part. Sometimes I eat, you know, I'll try and go like a few days just eating raw just to kind of recoup. And
Yeah.
yeah, man, so a lot of raw foods, a lot of cooked foods. I put a garden in, so I've been eating from the garden, eating plants,
Cool.
and it doesn't really bother me. I grew it. I put energy and time into it, and
Yeah.
I mean, like even like carrots and cucumbers, tomatoes, they don't really bother me. Even like beans didn't really
Hmm.
bother me at all. So it's kind of interesting, and I just think, the energy you put into, and yeah, so kind of a little bit of everything. I just kind of eat, and I don't really think about it too much, but I just eat what I want, and I want to eat raw meat and raw foods every day. I need to. When I don't, I do feel like shit, so
Yeah.
I need to at least have like half my day raw.
Yeah. I have that same experience. We'll slip in like a couple cooked meals a month or something like that too.
Yeah.
And yeah, we don't feel great afterward. It's just like the difference between cooked and raw is really it's really noticeable, man.
It's noticeable, man, like a lot.
Hmm.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So that to me is confirmation that I'm like, I'm not worried that like it's like a drug or something that I'm slip down a slippery slope and all of a sudden we're eating cooked food every day for every meal. So I'm like, every time we eat it, we're like, that was delicious, but
Yeah.
the feeling afterwards is like it's not the greatest compared to raw.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't even, I don't think, even notice it unless you ate raw foods. So it's
100%.
you don't really notice like anything like when it comes to food, you don't notice things until you like remove it completely from your life and then go back to it. That's what I've noticed. So yeah, that's our same experience with cooked foods. But yeah, back to like or just going to your like plant stuff like that. I think that's ideal. Like I don't think you have to really adhere to any sort of specific diet. Just kind of eat what feels good to you.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of people aren't going to really find the raw diet appealing or find it necessary because they're just. I personally think that like a lot, or if not most, health issues stem from spiritual issues because going back to like the biblical stuff, I'm a firm believer in the spirit world. I believe this is the spirit world is the actual unseen reality, and that's what's actually running. That's what's actually going on here, and this physical world is actually like an illusion. And so, I believe that trauma and things in your life that happen can basically create health problems in people, and I think that could be causing a lot of issues with a lot of people, and that's why they can't really heal themselves just like vitamins or supplements or getting on a specific diet because it's like I always say, like for raw foods, let's say like what about all the Olympic athletes, right? Like those guys are just not eating raw foods. So it's like you don't need raw foods to be like a high performance person. But then again, a lot of them might be young and running on hormones too. So that's kind of a separate discussion. But my example is always like everyone that like big jolly old fat guy that's 5 kids and a family and he's just the happiest guy on earth. And he eats whatever the hell he wants. He barbecues, he drinks beer. He's the happiest dude in the world. Right?
Yeah.
And conversely, you have like, the 20-year-old dude in his apartment, on the strictest diet in the world, and he's like the most stressed out, unhealthy guy you know. So it's like, obviously diet is not the only variable. There's some other factors in there. Family, community, sense of just people around you love you. I think that's a huge factor in healing. And also, I believing you're healing is a big factor too. I think belief. If you believe you're getting sick, you're going to get sick. If you believe you're going to heal, you're going to heal. I just think there's so many forces and factors out there considering, and a lot of them are metaphysical. So a lot of people might think it's kooky, crazy, or whatever. But like to me, those are the variables we're missing because like you can't really explain through like microscopes and petri dishes and stuff, man. There's stuff that you just can't measure. You can't measure it with a graduated silver or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like so. That's just kind of how I everything personally and try to make sense of all this stuff.
Yeah. I think it's a great point, and I really agree. When I kind of look at what the people who are living to 100, what am I finding? Some of them drink Diet Coke every day, or even regular Coke, or they eat whatever they want. They eat Bacel, and they're eating processed foods since they've existed. They live to be 100. Man, they don't care. They don't care what you think. They don't care what other people think. They don't get stressed out. They just live their life, man. They got family. They got big families typically. They got lots of community and support and
Yep.
friends. And, that's the commonality that I see, man. I see strength in their mind
Mm-hmm.
over strength in their body all the time,
Right.
and it usually goes hand in hand, but yeah, I found that a lot. And so to the
Mm-hmm.
point of the microscope, I want to plug the Biggleson brothers, Adam and Josh Biggleson, and their father, Dr. Harvey Biggleson. And he's really one of the main guys of the terrain model. And through this dark field microscopy, they call it holographic blood. And you can see these shapes and these forms, and their conclusions are that they're holograms because if any of these shapes or forms were actually in your blood, they would, cause some sort of stroke. They would clog your capillaries, um,
Mm-hmm.
and they attribute this to like trauma. The Bigglesons are completely on this idea that trauma is foundational to every single illness out there,
Mm-hmm.
guaranteed. And so their father actually developed this way of looking through the microscope, and they were able to see which organs were functioning. And it was coupled with traditional Chinese medicine that they could explore this. And you could see scarring that was due to emotional scars, and you could see the organs that they were related to. The most fascinating work to look into, because you're like, yeah, you can't look down to the microscope and see this stuff, and then you're like, wait a minute, you can see these holograms in the blood. So then some of these guys will say that, like the new age guys that kind of hop on this train, they'll say that it's like when you hear like an haven't really looked into it. What do they call it? Like hydrocels and different like fear mongering nonsense that they're like, this is the vaccine giving us, like the mRNA vaccines are giving
Oh,
us these big,
right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
they say they're looking at live blood analysis, but first of all, live blood analysis and dark field are different.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, the Bigglesons say that they're looking at, you know, they're looking at holograms because if any of these were actually in the blood, they would clog your capillaries and you would have a stroke and die. You know,
Wow.
so their work is just mind blowing, and they don't really teach microscopy because, again, like, is the microscope really necessary? Like, their father really looked at like the way that you walked into the room to assess your health. You know, he was kind of like in there with you, man, and he'd look at the blood
Yeah.
and he would be able to confirm with the blood, but they don't really teach it because it could be misinterpreted really bad. And again, what are they seeing? You know, we don't know, but they're obviously seeing these things, and their father healed a lot of people, a lot of people. He was a really well-respected man in the field, and it's just crazy, man. His book, Holographic Blood, is really good. It kind of goes over all these concepts.
Sweet. I'm gonna
It's just
write that.
mind-blowing, man. Like, something fun to look into, you know. Is it absolutely necessary to heal? Again, it's not. But, you know, I know other guys in the field that they heal all these ailments, chronic ailments, you know, they heal it purely from a psychological realm. And you know, the psychological and the spiritual, how disconnected is that? It's not disconnected
Mhm.
at all.
Yeah.
But they heal these people from cancer purely from the psychological front, and it's like, you know, how there's logically you need to think that, okay, well, there not, needs to be some sort of root cause in this for at least some people. Maybe there is sometimes where it is because of overwhelming toxicity. A lot of these old heads in the field don't think so. They think it's all comes down to some sort of trauma. It doesn't need to be a big trauma. If you're getting acutely sick a lot, you know, maybe you don't want to go to your recital or your job or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like, it's different things like that they would say, like, well, and again, it's not an empirical endeavor either. You can't confirm this through empiricism is completely flawed, and we're kind of tiptoeing in kind of the German new medicine point of view, and I don't really know enough about German new medicine. I'm trying to learn
Yeah.
more, and but it's cool, man. Like, it's a cool field too to explore. Like, people are healing from, they don't even touch the biological, like, and you know, do I completely agree with that? Not necessarily. Like, I think because what we go back to earlier, you know what I mean? Like, your spiritual path is completely aligned with your physical path.
Mhm.
People who heal psychologically and heal spiritually always tend to want to eat healthier foods. You know, they want to move their body, and because to honor God, you need to honor your temple, and it means you got to eat good food, and you don't smoke cigarettes, and you move your body, and you pray, and, like, you know what I mean? So it's like it all goes hand in hand. So it's a big confounding variable as well. Like, you
Mhm.
know, can you heal purely from the psychological realm? Because often when you heal your traumas, you want to honor your body. So it's kind of, these are the things that I think about, you know, and but it's interesting that people can kind of go directly from the psychological trauma, spiritual front,
Mhm.
and have amazing results, lifetimes of results.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know, man. It's mind blowing, and it's almost. It sounds like German new medicine. I love the concept, and I do believe it, but a lot of it just sounds crazy. You're just like, I can't. What do you mean? You know what I mean? It's like you're coughing because, like, I don't know, whatever, something that happened to you when you were a kid or something. But it's crazy. But I love the concept, man, and like I think there's a lot of truth to that. And like, have you ever heard of family constellation therapy?
No, I haven't.
Oh, that's a really cool one to look into too, man. You should.
I like
I
that.
don't know if you ever listened to the Extreme Health podcast.
A couple episodes, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
look up, just look up the ones on family constellation therapy, and that one is just like mind blowing, dude. Like this guy's healing people by looking into your family tree, and he's like explaining like things that happened to you based on something that happened like your great uncle, like actual things that happened in his life, like just for example, uh, like someone got wrongly incarcerated and thrown into jail and couldn't figure out, like, you know, it was just like a bad deal. He just got wrongly wrong crime and thrown. And this guy went into this family tree and he figured out that like his great grandpa had committed a crime, never got caught for it, and he never went to jail for it. So it's like that's like a kind of a minor example, but it's like things that happen to your grandparents passed down to you, and I'm a firm believer in generational trauma and things like that. So I think a lot of people, they can't explain like, why things are happening to them or why they feel the way that they do. And it's like, I think everybody feels that way to a certain point. Like certain people are suffering obviously more